A true Christian will be sensitive to the sin in their life, and it will lead them to brokenness and genuine confession. But the person who says they are a Christian and are not sensitive to sin, they are not sensitive to sin, it does not lead them to confession. The person who is that way is not a Christian. Now, when I teach this, sometimes in a pastor's conference, I always say something. Now, I'm about to say something that all you pastors will almost laugh about because it's so true. Whenever there's a word from God out of the pulpit and the Holy Spirit begins to work convicting the people of God of sin, sometimes that happens. You'll be preaching and it's like God begins to work and people begin to be convicted of sin. You know what the most unusual thing is? It is always this. Pastors of many years will agree with me. It is always the case. The most holy, the most godly, the most devoted people in the church are always the ones that are most broken over their sin and come forward confessing it. And the most devious, carnal, backslidden, cold-hearted, professing Christians in the church sit there as cold as a stone, as though nothing has been said. What are we seeing? We're seeing the difference between the lost membership and the saved membership. The true Christian does not live without sin. John makes that clear. But the true Christian is sensitive to sin. And that sensitivity to sin leads them to confession, which leads them to cleansing. Now let me ask you a question. Are you sensitive to sin? Now let me ask you another question that might terrify you. When was the last time you were broken over your sin and weeping? When was the last time God showed you specific sin in your life and it led you to a broken heart, weeping, and confession? I say that to so many church members and they don't even have a clue as to what I'm talking about. What is your attitude towards sin? When it says in Ezekiel that He will take out your heart of stone and replace it with a heart of flesh, what He is saying is this: I will take out your heart of stone that cannot respond to divine stimuli, and I will replace it with a heart that responds to me. Is your heart responsive to God when He begins to speak of your sin? Now, let's look at this text a little more in depth. If we say that we have no sin, you know, in 1 John 5:16, he talks about a sin unto death, and there is great debate, has been, will continue to be, over exactly what that means. And I'm not saying that I know, but some very, very careful scholars have said this. It may be this. Someone who adamantly, habitually refuses to acknowledge their sin before God. That when God comes to them, when God speaks to them, when God's dealing with people about sin, they dig in their heels and refuse to acknowledge their sin and their need of cleansing. Let me ask you a question, because the human side of this will always reveal something of the divine side. How do you respond when someone comes to you and tells you that you have sinned? When some friend or some person you barely know comes to you with a word to convict you of something you've done wrong, do you buckle against that? Do you stand up and fight that? Do you immediately say, no way, you're judging, you're this, you're that? Or do you ponder their words as if they could be true? Do you think about it for a while? Are you sensitive? Or are you hard-hearted and proud?